Happy Memorial Day. That sounds like a bit of an oxymoron when you consider the history of this holiday. It was established in 1868 to commemorate the sacrifices of soldiers who fought and died in the Civil War. The holiday was called Decoration Day because of the tradition of decorating graves with flowers and flags, something many people still do this weekend. One of the earliest Memorial Day commemorations was organized by a group of formerly enslaved people in Charleston, South Carolina, about a month after the Confederacy surrendered in 1865. In 1968, Congress passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act, putting Memorial Day and many other holidays on Monday in order to give federal employees a 3-day weekend. We are grateful for that. It was in 1971 that Memorial Day became the official name of the holiday, more than a century after it originated. As a little girl, I clearly remember going to my grandparents' graves on what we called Decoration Day sometimes. Every year we placed a bouquet of red, white, and blue flowers in front of the mausoleum in which they were buried. I know this tradition brought comfort to my mother and her sisters and brothers. When my grandparents died, we children were not allowed to attend their Catholic funeral, and the process of mourning was nothing like the one that we held when my parents died in the 1990s. All Souls Unitarian Church and Unitarian Universalists in general across America were the leaders in changing the way Americans view death and the rituals we perform around our loved ones whose lives have ended. Memorial Day is a time when we honor our ancestors, especially those who served and even died for our country, and we take time to remember our loved ones. Of course, it's also the weekend since 1911 when the Indianapolis 500-mile race takes place in our city. The race is preceded by a grand parade and brings a feeling of celebration right before the last Monday in May, now the official day, on which we go back to thinking about the end of life and the memories that give us the word memorial. Memorial services and celebrations of life have replaced funerals in the language most of us use to talk about the process of eulogizing our dead. This ritual has become a time not just to send a spirit or soul into eternity, but to celebrate that the human who has died leaves us with a spirit in the form of a legacy, a wealth of memories, and hopefully with a deep love that can be shared eternally as long as it is passed on to other humans. Unitarian Universalists were leaders in making these changes in the United States and even around the world. In 1963, it was Jessica Mitford's book, The American Way of Death, that brought light to the ways in which funeral homes were taking advantage of the grief people experience with loss and creating a process of mourning that was extremely expensive and often not even meaningful. The book led to congressional hearings on the funeral industry and an investigation led by the Federal Trade Commission, which revealed that, indeed, the cost of a funeral for the average American family was extremely high, and that most services pushed by funeral directors were either unnecessary or even predatory. In 1998, Mitford updated her book shortly before she died, finding that not a lot had improved. Mitford advocated cremation rather than embalming and burial, scattering of ashes, and simple ceremonies, or none at all. When she died, she was cremated with no ceremony and her ashes were scattered at sea. Her memorial service was very inexpensive, less than $600, which today would be about $1,000. Mitford's book and the ensuing investigation encouraged Unitarian Universalists to begin developing traditions around death for which we are now widely recognized and which have become popular among other religions and the American public in general. You can find these traditions enumerated on the website for the Unitarian Universalist Association, or the UUA. The definition of a memorial service, one of the first major changes UUs began to practice widely, is that the body of the person who has died is not present at the service. Without the need for a coffin, embalming, and all of the other preparation that goes with it, several $1,000s can be immediately eliminated from the cost of burying someone. UUs began to seek the possibility of cremation and scattering of ashes, which had been nearly impossible in the United States until the late 20th century, around the mid-1950s. Burning the dead is an ancient practice, probably seen as early as 3,000 years ago in the Stone Age. But the first crematorium in America wasn't built until 1876. In 1900, there were only 20 crematories in the United States, none of them in Indiana. In 1913, the Cremation Association of America was founded, and the number of crematories increased to 52, but still none in Indiana. By 1975, there were 425 crematories in North America, as Canada added this practice, and by 1999, cremation was done for 25% of all deaths in the United States. By 2019, the percentage had increased to nearly 55%, or more than 1.5 million cremations. Cremation has become popular not only because it is less expensive, but also because it uses less real estate, and because Unitarian Universalists have made the practice popular. It used to be thought that cremation was a more sanitary process than burial, but it was proven not to be the case. Cremation, like anything that involves burning and therefore putting carbon into the atmosphere, does have the drawback of not being a very green process. A new tradition of burial is beginning to catch on, and there are 4 cemeteries in Indiana that now offer green or natural burials. This process can legally only be offered by a cemetery in Indiana at this time, so it would not be possible to have a natural burial yet at All Souls. Scattering ashes in our memorial gardens is a ritual that we've been offering at All Souls since around the mid-1980s. The first person whose ashes were placed in our memorial garden was Frida Tremontini. Her husband Vern's ashes were also scattered in the garden many years later. I knew both of these people. The first time I was able to see this process being done, however, was when Louise Davis, my friend Marie's mother, died in 1987. My father, Horace Reed, was the next person whose ashes were placed in the All Souls Memorial Garden in 1990. My mother's ashes joined my dad's in 1995 beneath a rhododendron bush, one of her favorite flowers. The bush blooms every year, and that, of course, is very meaningful to me. Last week, I attended the memorial service for Bob Olson, a longtime friend of mine and member of All Souls. Bob's wife, Pat, who was also a good friend, also had her ashes placed in the memorial gardens when she died. Bob's ashes were lovingly placed in our memorial garden last Saturday by his surviving family. His name will be the next one you see on the plaque that lists everyone buried in our memorial garden. The memorial service for Bob was very similar to the ones we had for my parents in 1990 and 1995, with music, readings, and eulogies that reflect our humanist outlook as Unitarian Universalists, and with the focus on the person who has passed away rather than on a deity or a religious system of beliefs. It was the hard work of many Unitarians at All Souls that made this possible. Let me describe a little bit of what work was involved. As late as 1975, not only was it not possible to be cremated in Indiana because funeral homes did not offer this service, but also Indiana laws were not conducive to allowing cremation. Therefore, Hoosiers were forced to pay for expensive wooden or metal caskets with perhaps a satin or silk lining, and for the body being placed in that casket to be prepared with embalming, with the body properly dressed and made up to look as lifelike as possible. Also for the use of the funeral home for visitations, which in earlier times had been in people's homes, but which we now hold in our social hall here at All Souls. There's nothing wrong with the customs practiced by funeral homes and cemeteries. In fact, Many of the customs that are somewhat costly, such as elaborate floral bouquets, displaying and caring for a body that reminds us of the person that once held a living, loving spirit, or having music played by a hopefully well-paid musician, all of this is very comforting. But in the mid-1900s, a family could be bankrupted by the costs associated with these things. This was true at the time of my grandparents dying in 1948 and 1954. That family was bankrupted. I can assure you that if one of my loved ones were to die nowadays from gun violence, for example, I would want some of these costly aspects of memorializing him, her, or them. Today, a member of our church can hold a memorial service in the sanctuary, bury a loved one in the memorial garden, and have a lovely reception visitation prepared by Babette Miller and volunteers on the Memorial Services Committee. And the only cost might be that of the cremation, around $1,000. To make this possible, members of All Souls had to convince funeral homes and cemeteries to even offer cremation. It's now available through almost every funeral home and cemetery in Indianapolis. Members of All Souls also lobbied legislators to amend the Indiana laws so that we could have changes in burial laws and regulations that had been imposed on funeral homes and cemeteries. Members who chose the traditions that are now commonly offered by funeral homes and cemeteries were sometimes ostracized by friends and neighbors and even family members who were not Unitarian. I am grateful for the work done and the sacrifices made that will allow me to be memorialized in a way that makes me and my family comfortable whenever I die. When we first established the memorial gardens here at All Souls, names of those buried were on the plaque you see here on the wall in the sanctuary. We've made a few changes since then, and now, if desired and paid for, one can choose to more elaborately record the names and even dates of the deceased. This was done for Rudy and Connie Rodebush, whose memorial benches are in the garden, and for Alta and Bill Bellinger, whose memorial urns hold flowers most of the year, brightening the garden. I encourage you to take a walk through the gardens or sit on the benches in memory of Rudy and Connie and pray or meditate when you need some solitude or comfort. Sometimes you'll see the water flowing from the fountain. It's very comforting. So are the plants and the flowers that have grown here. The rose bushes have been added since we first started the garden. We've made a few changes since we originally created the memorial gardens. Recently, we created a pet cemetery where the ashes of several All Souls members' pets have been scattered. Spooky Richie was the first pet whose ashes were buried here. So again, happy Memorial Day. Remember your loved ones tomorrow and honor our ancestors, especially those who fought and died for our freedom to make choices about how we live, how we die, and how we celebrate life and love. Keep them in your hearts, think of them often, and rejoice that they were here and made a difference for all of us. Peace be with you. Blessed be. Amen.